Chapter 7, June 28, 2013. Pleasant Valley, New York, USA. 71 degrees Fahrenheit, 0900 hours. I found myself standing in the woods I had often explored as a kid. It was sunny, the air was pleasant and surprisingly quiet. I wondered for a moment why I would dream about these woods when something caught my attention. I strained my ears for a moment, then heard it again. It was the sound of an object being dragged over dirt. A moment later, a young boy crested the small rise, using a rope to drag a crate full of what looked like water balloons behind him. He had a squirt gun slung across his back. It took a moment, due to the decades that had passed, before I recognized myself as a kid. I watched as the younger version of me carefully hauled the crate into a nearby tree, then staged his ambush. I could remember this day, but only vaguely. Soon after, two more kids came into view. I dug through my memories before finally settling on their names: Thomas, or Tommy, and Nathaniel. They had been my best friends back when we lived in New York State. They were headed down the trail I stood on. Neither saw the younger me hiding in ambush. As they drew closer, young Dante began throwing water balloons. Squeals of outrage came from the two land-bound boys as they were drenched. Young Dante laughed uproariously before losing his balance and falling from the branch he was perched on. I watched as his arm folded in half, breaking with a sickening snap. Young Dante passed out, and the other boys turned white as sheets. Nathaniel immediately ran down the path, disappearing from sight. Tommy stayed with Dante to make sure he was okay. He turned Dante over, checking to see if he was awake. A short time later, Nathaniel returned with a young woman. My breath caught in my throat when I saw her. My mother had passed some years before in my life, but she was young, healthy, and vibrant in my dreams. I watched as my mother gathered up young Dante, then carried him down the path. I could see his arm hanging limply, still at a strange angle. While I watched, it seemed to straighten itself out. I followed, not wanting to lose sight of them. She loaded Dante into the back seat of her car. I sat in the passenger seat as she drove the car to the nearest hospital. We arrived at the emergency room, and she hurriedly took Dante in. They sat while he cradled his arm, and she filled out paperwork. A short time later, they were ushered into another part of the hospital. Dante held still while x-rays were taken of his arm. They returned to a room and waited until a doctor showed up. He pulled up the x-rays on a monitor and looked them over. "Yes, I can see a small refracture here. Looks like the break is maybe 6 months old. The fall must have caused it to fracture again." I watched as my mother worriedly looked at young Dante. He had been given something for the pain, causing him to be slightly out of it.
"Doctor, are you sure it was 6 months ago?"
"Oh yes, quite sure. This here," he circled a dim spot with his finger, "this is indicative of an old break. Looks like it healed nicely, but there's a hairline fracture running through the old break. Your son should wear a sling and be careful for the next 6 weeks or so."
"No cast?"
"No, we hardly do those anymore. Only for the worst breaks that require surgery. Your son will be fine, though it will hurt for a few days as it begins to heal."
"Thank you, doctor."
She gathered young Dante up and walked out of the hospital. I trailed after. All of this was new, but the most shocking part was what the doctor had said. I watched my younger self break his arm less than an hour before. However, the doctor claimed it was months old.
"Dante, honey, wake up."
Young Dante stirred from his seat in the back. He looked with bleary eyes at my mother. She smiled, worry written across her face.
"Dante, you can't mention this. If your friends ask, it wasn't a bad break, just a little fracture." "Okay, Mom."